Hello, everybody. It is Russell with Budget Vintage, back yet again. We just concluded our Taiga tournament on Saturday the 25th. It is Sunday the 26th, as you can see down on my clock. And I thought I would record you guys a tournament report. Now, those of you who watch most of the YouTube content might recognize this shirt. I've recorded a bit of content today. I spent about 2.5 hours interviewing Austin, who won the Taiga. Although I actually don't know if he took the Taiga or if he took store credit. I think he took the Taiga. Austin, if you see this video, comment if you took the Taiga or the store credit. And I spent some time interviewing Preston, who did who crushed the 8-week league at Monster. I am going to get the interview with Austin up tonight. And then I think I'm going to try to get my tournament report, which is this right now, up next, because it is very relevant. And then I'm going to try to get the Preston interview up this Thursday or maybe next Thursday, since we have a lull between seasons. Now, moving on to what this actually is, I am breaking the Taiga event down into 3 separate videos because I like to farm out content because you know how it goes. This portion is going to be my tournament report. It's going to be about what I played, which is High Tide. I'm sure you guys are so sick of hearing me talk about High Tide. I played High Tide. We're going to go through my matches, my matchups, deck choices, stuff like that. I did top 8, and then I got out really early in the top 8. I will say, so I've got top 8 results here. I posted them in the Discord. I'm not sure they're accurate. Someone can correct me. Let me find my snip. So this is the order. Congrats to Austin for first, Kyle for second. I know that's correct. So what I don't know is top 8 was single elimination, right? So like we had seeding going into it. I was 3rd seed, etc. And the way I understand it is that 1st seed plays 8th seed. 2nd seed plays 7th seed, yada yada, all the way down, right? So, like, for example, me and Eddie, right? Who gets 5th and who gets 6th? Because we were both eliminated in round 1. My assumption was that I placed higher than Eddie because I was a higher seed than Eddie. And I applied the same metric to Drew and Ezra. And then Doug was a higher seed than Ash. So when they were both eliminated in the second round to miss like grand finals, I thought that's how the final placement would work. If that's not correct, my apologies. I hope I didn't misrepresent people's finishes. Either way, this is who top 8'd. I know that much at least. And I do know that Austin won, and I do know that Kyle came in second. So that's the top 8. I'm going to talk about them more later. I'm just going to talk about me this time because this is about me. Keep your eyes and ears posted for me to do like kind of an overall like look at the top 8 decks, as well as looking at interesting decks that were in the tournament. I will say, I'm pretty sure I saw someone cast a Pan-Glacial Worm. There were a lot of crazy decks running around. And I'm also going to try to do a little bit of a metagame breakdown in that video, looking specifically at sideboard cards, what people brought, right? Are people bringing hate for, like, control, combo, graveyards, artifacts, blah, 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 and to see which decks people were bringing that would get hit by sideboard hate. How many graveyard decks were there? How many combo decks that are like Stormy? How many control decks? That kind of thing. Because I want to see if people's sideboard cards actually reflect the pulse of the metagame. But that's a different video. Anyway, I think that I placed 5th overall. I was 3rd seed going into top 8, I think. I played High Tide. I felt really good about the deck. Again, I can take no credit for this list. I believe Everett and Doug think tanked this up together. The only thing I really did was add Treasure Cruise to it, and then swap the Brain Freeze out for Blue Sun Zenith as part of a budget saving move, and then I played with the sideboard some. That I can take credit for the sideboard. So my first round, I played against Doug, and I lost pretty badly. Doug is playing his Thopter Gifts pile. 1 second. Video capture device. Okay, that's better. He's playing Thopter Gifts Pile. It's a little bit different, and honestly, I think that Doug deserves a whole video for talking about. Like, Doug deserves a dedicated video talking about this Thopter Gifts Pile, because he's played it for a long time, and he's tuned it for a long time, and he has a really good read on the metagame and how he wants to prepare for it. A couple notable things about it this time. He's a lot more blue-black leaning. White is more of a splash for Shorakai Recommission. That's actually part of a gifts pile to get Thopter Sword, I believe. And then Blossoming Calms in the sideboard. He's on Sudden Edicts today. He is very, very well prepared. Oh, Impulses. I think Impulses are relatively new. And he's off Lingering Souls, which is new. And he is on Mouth of Ronan. He is also off of Balance, which I find surprising. I thought he really enjoyed Balance, so I may have to talk to him about that. If you guys want me to do a deep dive on Gifts Ungiven Thopter Sword with Doug, you can comment it below to give me some YouTube engagement, but I will probably try to set that up anyway because I would really enjoy doing that with Doug. He's a very, very interesting and intelligent Magic player. Anyway, he was very, very ready for me. If you look at the sideboard, so he's got 4 main board Inquisitions and 4 main board Counterspells. So that's what I have to play around game 1. Which seems doable, but isn't exactly easy. Then in the sideboard, he gets 2 Duress, 2 Extirpate, which are so bad for me. And they pair really, really well with Inquisitions and Duresses. And he gets 2 Tests of Talents and 2 Void Mirrors. And I would have to ask him. I don't think he brought in the Blossoming Calms. He is in a group chat with me and Everett, the High Tide Hive Mind, and we talk about High Tide a lot. I think he knows that I beat Blossoming Calm pretty easily. I sideboard in Fascination, and I use that to mill out myself and the opponent, and then they die. So I bring that in the sideboard, both so that I'm not so cold to like Stonebrain effects or like Lost Legacy. Although I think most people are going to name High Tide now. There was a time where I think people would name like your Blue Sun Zenith or your Brain Freeze, but I think people name High Tide now. But Fascination helps me beat Shroud, like Solitary Confinement. It helps me beat Blossoming Calm, and it helps against Stonebrain. So I don't think Doug brought in Blossoming Calm. Long story short, he was super ready for me, and I got ranched. I just absolutely destroyed. Game 1, I think I had a shot. And people have asked me before how I feel about the control matchup in High Tide, and I said I think I'm favored because it gives me enough time to put a lot of basic islands into play, and then I can use Turnabout to tap them down on their instep and then combo off. I don't know if that's true anymore. I don't know if it was ever true. I think I'm just playing it wrong. I feel like High Tide can be favored against control, but I just don't have the reps to do it. I feel like Remand should help, because I think that I should be able to get to a game state where I have 6 mana and Turnabout and Remand in my hand, and then also like cards to go off. And I feel like I should be able to, on their instep or their upkeep, depending, attempt to Turnabout your lands, and then if you go to counter my Turnabout, I feel like I can Remand my Turnabout to my own hand, which effectively nullifies the counterspell and then draws me a card if it goes off, or requires a second counterspell, which then clears the way for my High Tide turn on my turn. I thought that was fine, but I lost to Doug very badly game 1. Maybe not very badly, but I lost to Doug game 1. And then game 2, when he had his sideboard, it was so hard with Extirpate. Additionally, I think that the version I'm on, which is winning with Blue Sun Zenith, I talk a lot about how Blue Sun Zenith is just better than Brain Freeze. It's not strictly better. It's generally better. It's cheaper, it draws cards in your combo, and that's the 2 things that matter. But you do have to make their library +1, +3 mana, right? Because you have to pay 3 into it, and then you have to have them draw their whole deck. So generally, I assume I have to make about 53 to 56 mana if it's like turn 3 through 5. And that's doable, but it usually requires multiple high tides. I want to do a little gold fishing and figure out if I can win with one high tide, but my point is, if people start bringing an extirpate, if I find that it's difficult to make enough mana to win with Blue Sun Zenith or Fascination with only one high tide effect, then if my opponent has basic swamp extirpate in their hand, like they could show it to me on turn 1, I may not be able to win with a single high tide. We can do a little bit of napkin math. 4 turnabouts, 4 cloud, 4 snap, and 4 frantic search. So 4 clouds untaps 8 lands, 4 snaps untaps 8 lands, and rebuys 4 clouds. So 8, 16, 24 lands. Frantics untap 3. So it's 3, 6, 9, 12. So 8, 16, 24, plus 12 is 36. And turnabout on turn 3 is 3, on turn 4 is 4. So it's either 12 or 16. So 36 lands plus 12 or 16. Let's call it 12. So 48 untaps times 2 per basic island minus 1 for high tide, so 45. So I should be able to make 90 mana off one high tide. So theoretically, I should still be able to win through one extirpate. I guess, I don't know if I fully stated my concern. My concern is that if I attempt to go off against a face-up extirpate, I cast a high tide and then I cast a frantic search or whatever. They extirpate my high tide in response. That means I can never be under the effect of more than one high tide on my combo turn. And I don't know if that's okay. During a typical combo turn, just to make things guaranteed and easy, I will try to get up to 3, 4, or 5 because the math is easy high tides. Usually I'll do that by casting all 4 of my high tides, then using a Flood of Recollection to get to high tide. Or, sorry, no, just casting all 4 of my high tides makes my islands tap for 5, which makes the math really easy. So I think I can beat one extirpate if I cast high tide then go off. But the fact that extirpate plus Inquisition of Kozilek or Duress just strips my high tide is so scary. So I think I might have to start sideboarding Helm of Awakening. Additionally, I don't bring Spell Pierces in against control. My thought was that they're bad after a high tide. But I think control wants to fight over the high tide. So I really don't know if Spell Pierces should come in. And if they shouldn't come in against control, then they're really only coming in against Hymn to Turok decks. Because I don't really like to rely on Spell Pierce to pick up Void Mirrors and Damping Spheres. I usually rely on Echoing Truth for that. So Spell Pierces might not be the right sideboard card. I know I've kind of gone on a tangent here. Long story short is that Doug was very ready for me. Game 1, he just kind of ground me out. I was not able to combo, and then he killed me with Thopters. Game 2, he cast a Gifts Ungiven on my end step, and his pile was Inquisition of Kozilek, Duress, Counterspell, and Test of Talents, I believe. It might have been Extirpate instead of Test of Talents. I think it was Extirpate, Inquisition, Duress, and Counterspell. Doug, I know you're going to watch this video. Comment below what it actually was. I'm sorry that I forgot. Long story short, I gave him Duress and Inquisition because they were sorceries, and then I attempted to turn about him on his upkeep with the intent to tap him down, make his 2 sorcery speed cards not matter unless he had basic swamp in hand. Although, now that I think back to it, he may have had an Arcum's Astrolabe in play, so any land might have been a live draw for that, so it might have been a bad choice. Regardless, he was able to Test of Talents my turnabout in upkeep, And then he had access to Duress and Inquisition. He duressed me and took one of my 2 High Tides, and then I believe I cast a High Tide and attempted to go off because I knew he had a second discard spell in his hand. He chose not to cast the second discard spell because he wanted to cast an Astrolabe instead to attempt to hit his land drop. I personally think taking both of my High Tides to put me on 0% made sense instead of tapping out and giving me a chance to storm off, but my hand didn't look like I could win, and I didn't win off of it. So it's really hard to say that that was incorrect because he won. Regardless, it never feels bad to lose to Doug. He's a very accomplished player, and he's very, very nice and a good friend of mine. So I don't mind losing to him, especially in round 1, and I think he was ready for me. His sideboard is pretty geared towards unfair decks this week. So that was round 1. Round 2, I actually got the bye, which I thought was very funny because 2 weeks ago, at the Win a Bye tournament, I actually lost in the finals to Everett on Burn. So Everett had the round 1 bye, and I thought it was funny that I got the round 2 bye because I was runner up in that event. So it's fair for me to get the round 2 bye, right? So round 2 I got the bye, which I later found out, as far as breakers go, apparently the bye is considered to be a strong opponent because the bye it's considered to have never lost, I guess. I'll be honest, I don't know very much about breakers. Long story short, I was going into round 5, and I was in 8th place, I think, and I was trying to figure out if I could draw. Spoilers, Everett and I were playing in round 5 to get into top 8, and I talked to a couple people there. Shout out to Bill for helping me there, and shout out to my friends Daniel and Eli in the group chat. I've got a group chat with some Magic grinders, and they're really good at telling people if they can draw into top 8 at events. So I shot them my information, and they told me that I probably had to play. Chris was also really helpful. We'll talk more about the potential to draw in later. Long story short, I got to buy round 2. Round 3, I played against my good friend and roommate Andrew on Asmo Food. Now, a couple things about this. This is the list I had. I don't think it's quite correct. I think he submitted another list, but I'll be honest, this is like the 4th or 5th hour of content I'm making today. I've put a lot in today. I didn't feel like finding his correct list. It's very similar to this. I think the sideboard changed a little bit. Long story short, Andrew knew he wasn't going to be able to finish out the tournament, so I think he played something that he wouldn't have if he thought he could play the full tournament, if that makes sense. I don't want to say this is like a bad or a silly deck, but I don't think it's what he would have chosen if he knew he was going to have time for the whole tournament. He doesn't have a lot for me game 1, truthfully. So he, did some stuff and had some pressure, and then I comboed him. Game 2, this sideboard is not correct. I believe he had... Okay, so first off I want to say, he was playing 2 or 3 gambles. That's why he wanted to play this deck. Because he wanted to play gambles before they rose in price too much, which I think is very funny and very cool. The deck looked good. The deck did look good. Game 2, the sideboard is not exactly what he had. I didn't see any duresses. There was, I think, 1 red blast. There was 1 guttural response, and I swear to God, you can't make this up, there was a boil. I think for me. I think he had a boil just for me. So we're cruising along. He plays like a turn 1 or 2 Asmo and starts hitting me for 3 damage every turn, which is a fine clock. I think he kind of flooded out. He had a lot of lands in play and did, faithless looting stuff. He was able to cast a boil when I was on 3 or 4 lands. I was on 4 lands, and on his end step, I cast Impulse. It resolved. I cast Impulse again, and with Impulse on the stack, he boiled me. He blew up all 4 of my islands. We talked about it later. He should have let my second Impulse resolve before boiling me in the hopes that I would grab not a basic island. But realistically, I had no lands in hand, and I was grabbing basic island regardless of the boil. So I grabbed Basic Island, and then I think I cantripped off a Preordain into Islands 2 and 3, and then I was able to go off on 3 islands. It was not turn 3, because again I got boiled. It was turn 7, I think. But his pressure was kind of slow. I will say, he got me to within 1 attack of lethal. So it was pretty close. Pretty close. So I got the win there. Moving on to 2 and 1 with the bye, but 2 and 1's 2 and 1. And again, I came in second at the win a bye tournament. I kind of deserved it. As much as anyone deserves a random bye, right? I will note now that I only played against homies up until the top 8. Not to say that my top 8 opponent wasn't a homie. I really like my top 8 opponent, but this is my play group. Doug, Andrew. Round 3 I played against Will on Martyr Proc, and round 4, because it was Doug, Bye, Andrew, Will. Then round 5 I played against Everett. So it was a lot of team kills. Round 4 I played against Will. This was his list today, or this week. It's Martyr Proc. You guys know it and you love it. I will say I've gassed up Martyr Proc, and by gassed up I mean told people to tech for it a lot. It might be time to slow down with the Martyr Proc hate. I think we've got that covered. I think the format has evolved to be stormy enough and combo-y enough that we can probably leave Martyr Proc alone for a little while. I say that because round 2, Will played against the Mono Red Obosh player, Austin, who had never played a tournament before. He actually drove 2 hours to get there, and he had watched some of my videos, and he had a Sulfur Elemental in the sideboard for Will specifically. That's a 3 mana, 2/2 red creature with flash and split second. It gives white creatures -1/-1. So Will actually sent me a message. He sent it in Facebook chat round 2 while I was in my match. He said, my round 2 opponent, it was a joke by the way, I think. He said, my round 2 opponent had a sideboard Sulfur Elemental because of your videos, my videos. He said he'd never played the format before and he had a Sulfur Elemental. And Will said to me, you owe me a Taiga. And I was like, that's fair, man. I think I may have gassed Martyr Proc up a little too much. I think it's good, but I think we have successfully, we've successfully stomped Martyr Proc down a little bit. So maybe we slow down on the Sulfur Elementals, guys. I will say, Will is respecting combo and High Tide specifically. 4 Blossoming Calms, although Fascination does kind of move around that, and then 4 Damping Spheres. Game 1, I believe Will had a very fast draw. It was a Champion of the Parish draw. Turn 1 Champion, turn 2, 2 1-drops, attack for 3, and then turn 3, I think he had 2 more 1-drops, and attacked for 5. I think he had a Sky Hussar and was tapping some of his cards, so it was mostly just the Champion. I believe I went off on turn 4 when I was 1 attack away from dead. I will say I went off respecting Swords to Plowshares because Swords to Plowshares does matter against High Tide a little bit. If I play a Cloud of Fairies and then I go to snap it to make mana, Swords to Plowshares does stop that. It exiles the Cloud of Fairies, it fizzles the snap, and then it can leave me stranded. So I did try to play around that. And I also tried to play around Mana Tithe. There was a time where I wanted to spend 5 mana on a 3-drop and a 2-drop. I think it was Solve the Equation and then Impulse or something. And I chose to respect Mana Tithe just in case, because I felt like I had the wiggle room. Game 2, he brought in his Damping Spheres. He had a draw that seemed not to pan out too well. It was kind of slow, but he had a Damping Sphere. And I was able to solve the equation, pick up an Echoing Truth, then Echoing Truth the Damping Sphere, and go off. And I want to take a second and talk about Solve the Equation. I'm a big fan of it. I have seen 3 to 4 other High Tide lists. Preston's, Luke's, which we talked some shop during the tournament. Michael, I think, played Blue-Red High Tide, and Everett's original High Tide list. I think this is by far the strongest shell. You guys are welcome to disagree. I know that Will doesn't really like Solve the Equation and the Turbo Mind's Desire. I really like Solve the Equation for Mind's Desire, and I also... So here's the problems that I think Solve the Equation solves. It is a very clean path to Mind's Desire, and Mind's Desire is the best card in the deck. It is restricted in Vintage, and it is banned everywhere else except Commander. Mind's Desire is the strongest card in the deck. That's not up for debate. Solve the Equation is a huge cost. It's a huge financial investment. It's been creeping up as well. It's $11 now. But it finds Mind's Desire. That means that for those of you who don't know High Tide, or this list specifically, if I have a hand that has High Tide, Rituals, and Solve the Equation, I have to make 9 mana total. Then I solve for Mind's Desire, and I cast Mind's Desire. Once I cast Mind's Desire, I probably find spells to continue to go off, and especially if I find a Remand or a Flood of Recollection. Those are both ways to rebuy Mind's Desire and potentially cast it a second time. Once I cast my second Mind's Desire, it's very unlikely for me to fizzle. I think that this deck has the lowest fizzle rate of all the High Tide versions because of that. Additionally, Solve the Equation finds High Tide, believe it or not. I was talking to Luke, and he said that he lost some games Saturday because he had trouble finding his High Tide. It was just in the bottom 30 cards or whatever, all 4 copies. There were at least 2 games, I think 3 or 4 games, where on turn 3, I just cast Solve the Equation for High Tide, and then on turn 4, I cast High Tide, and then I won the game. So that is great. So Solve the Equation, quickest path to Mind's Desire, quickest path to High Tide sometimes, for a turn 4 kill, which a turn 4 kill does race a lot of the format. If you are against someone who's not interacting with you too much and it's a straight up race, a turn 4 kill does it quite often. The final point for Solve the Equation is that it finds sideboard cards, and that's why we're talking about this now. In Game 2 against Will, I cast a Solve the Equation, and I tutored an Echoing Truth, and then I untapped, passed to him. On his end step, I Echoing Truthed, I bounced his Damping Sphere, and then I won the game. So that's why I like Solve the Equation. I think this list just plays pretty nicely. I could be convinced that it's not perfect, but it's felt good enough. So that's why I like Solve the Equation. I'm definitely willing to believe there are other better versions. I'm just not sure I've seen them yet. Personally, I don't really like Peregrine Drake because I want to win before I have 5 lands in play. I don't really like the Ghostly Flicker package, although I haven't played it. I will say, I know Luke was playing the Ghostly Flicker, Mnemonic Wall, Peregrine Drake thing. Maybe it's better than I think. Maybe I should be playing with that. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I like this list. So, anyway, Martyr Proc, I bounced the Damping Sphere and then I won the game. I will say, I interviewed Preston today, and I think that video will come out after this one. He was playing Repeals in his sideboard instead of Echoing Truths. Repeal is a better card for getting 1 Damping Sphere off the board, I would say. It is also a better card for interacting with like a Goblin Guide or a Champion of the Parish, because you're paying 2 mana and you draw a card. But I might like Echoing Truth because it means I beat 2 Damping Spheres. Whereas if I have a Repeal and there's 2 Damping Spheres, it's still a problem, right? Because you'd have to like get 2 Repeals in your hand. So I'm not sure I'm willing to go that far. I will say I've never cast an Echoing Truth and bounced 2 cards. That's never happened. The fact that that's never happened in like the 3 or 4 tournaments I've played High Tide, maybe you don't need Echoing Truth. That could be true. So that was round 4. Now I'm 3-1 going into round 5. Here I'm playing Everett on Burn. Now, like I said, we played this matchup at the Winnaby, and he won. I took a game, though. This week, I brought 4 Blue Elemental Blasts. They're down to $1.08 from like $1.30 or $1.50, I think. So I brought those in. Game 1... Okay, so first let's talk about the Burn versus High Tide matchup. Obviously, it's kind of a race. Burn kills very fast. The time to kill is similar, but being like turn 3 to 4 for both decks, I would say. I think High Tide might average a little bit faster, but I'd have to look at more data to say for sure. The thing that swings it in Burns' favor is Pyrostatic Pillar. I cannot. I have trouble with this card. Let's put it like that. In game 1, if a Pyrostatic Pillar resolves, I don't think I can win. I don't have main board answers to it, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe there's an argument for one main board Echoing Truth, right? Just to like, I kind of like that. One main board Echoing Truth would be a solve the equation target, so it's like you have 5 copies when you need it. Additionally, one Echoing Truth kind of works with Cloud of Fairies, sort of. It's mana neutral if you have 1, it's mana positive if you have 2, under 1 High Tide. But my current configuration, I cannot beat a Pyrostatic Pillar. Game 1. So game 1, let me think back. I won game 1, I believe. Let me think for a second. Let me pause and think for a second. Alright, everybody. Sorry for the brief intermission. I am historically very bad at recalling my game states. It's just something I've always had trouble with. There's a lot of Magic players that like think back 2 days ago and they're like, oh, in round 3, game 2, turn 4, this was my hand, this was my opponent's board, this was my board. I can't do that. I don't know why. I have trouble even with... I should take notes during tournament reports. Anyway, I'm pretty sure I have this right. Everett, maybe correct me in the comments when I get it a little bit wrong. I won game 1, which was very unlikely. I believe that he had a 1-lander, and I was able to attempt to go off turn 3 because I was afraid that if he had another land, or if he drew another land, he would have a Pyrostatic Pillar to play. And if he had a Pyrostatic Pillar, I would lose. So I was lucky in that he was stuck on 1 land, and I was lucky that my opening hand had High Tide and I think Frantic Search, and I was able to go off on turn 3 and win the game. I recall it being very narrow and requiring pretty lucky Mind's Desire flips. I think I did a Mind's Desire for 5 or 6, which is not ideal. And then after the game, he did reveal he had a Pyrostatic Pillar in his hand. He missed the second land drop. And the thing is, the hand was good. It had enough 1-drop stuff to do to put pressure on. And if he ripped the second land, he would just straight up win. So it was a good keep. I think he just got unlucky is what I'm recalling. Game 2, I'm on the draw, but I get to bring in 4 blue elemental blasts. So I feel like I have a chance. He gets 2 early Goblin Guides down, which never drew me a land, which is fine. I had lands in play. I recall flipping a Solve the Equation and a Flood of Recollection. The turn that I flipped a Flood of Recollection, I think it was turn 3, I revealed the top card to be Flood, which didn't do much for me. I like cantripped a couple times, and I knew that my path to winning at that point was to cast Solve the Equation on my turn, find High Tide, because I didn't have it yet, and then go off the turn after. I was at 11 life, being attacked by 2 Goblin Guides down to 7, and I knew that I had to take a turn off to cast Solve, which would be getting hit by 2 more Goblin Guides down to 3, and then 1 bolt would kill me. So with the 2 Goblin Guides attacking me, I chose to burn 1 Snap to bounce 1 to save 2 life, which untapped, and then I used a blue elemental blast to kill the other Goblin Guide to stay at 11 life. It bought me a little bit of time, but solving for High Tide was not fast enough. I cast Solve the Equation, got High Tide, and then he killed me, I believe. Game 3 was interesting. I was on the play with 4 blue elemental blasts, so I felt kind of favored. I believe he played either Swift Spear or Goblin Guide on turn 1. Turn 2, I recall he took off. I don't think he spent his mana on turn 2, which indicated to me Skewer the Critics, Sulfuric Vortex. I'm not really sure what happened. Fire Blasts on turn 2. Um, it was odd. And then turn 3, he cast a Sulfuric Vortex, which I was able to remand to essentially buy a turn. I wasn't under very much pressure. Then a little bit of pressure came down, and I suspected he had 1 to 2 Fire Blasts in his hand. There was a Monastery Swift Spear in play at one point, and then a Pyrostatic Pillar got cast. At that point, I believe I was at 11 life, and I went to my turn, and he had hit me with a Swift Spear and had Pyrostatic Pillar Sulfuric Vortex in play. I think I went down to 11 off the Sulfuric Vortex. And to answer the Pyrostatic Pillar, I was going to be losing 2 life per spell that I cast. I also suspected he had a Fire Blast, which meant 4 life is where I would die. So I had to stay above 5 life. So I had 9, 7, 5. I had 3 spells. I also didn't feel like I could pass the turn back because he had a Swift Spear and there was an active Sulfuric Vortex. So it would cost me 3 life to pass the turn, which would put me at 8 life, which means I would have 1 spell to cast going to 6 and then living through a Fire Blast. But if I cast 2 spells in that spot, I would die. So I decided I had to go off, and I didn't have an answer to the Pyrostatic Pillar. I don't think I brought in my Echoing Truths. I believe I just brought in 4 Blue Elemental Blasts. So I cast a High Tide. I go to 9 life. I think it was a Frantic Search. I go to 7 life. And I was able to Frantic Search into a Blue Elemental Blast. I cast a Blue Elemental Blast targeting Pyrostatic Pillar. I went to 5 life, which is notably 1 more than Fire Blast. Then I was able to do High Tide things and win the game. Everett and I had talked going into the round, and we didn't think we could draw. There was some kind of crazy stuff going on with potential draws. Chris, I don't know very much about IDs. I have trouble figuring out tournament structure. Chris identified some odd stuff that was going on where there was a world where perhaps Everett and I could have both drawn and gotten to top 8. But we played it out, and from what we understood, there was a chance that if I won, we might both be top 8, which would have been the best universe for us. Unfortunately, I won, and Everett did not make top 8. I did, which, I mean, good for me, but unfortunate for Everett. We were talking about it briefly afterwards, and Everett identified that there was a misplay. He should have attacked me with Swift Spear, and he should have Fire Blasted on his turn to get the Prowess trigger, which would have put me at 10 life going to my turn. Sorry, not 10 life. I would have been at 6 life because I would have eaten a Fire Blast to the face as well. Notably, I was able to win the game at 5 life after answering the Pyrostatic Pillar, and he had a Fire Blast in hand for 4. So if he had Fire Blasted with Swift Spear in play and gotten the Prowess trigger, I would have been at 6 going to my turn, and High Tide would put me to 4. Frantic Search would put me to 2, and Blue Elemental Blast would put me to 0. So, really unfortunate. That is a really tough line to see, I think. I think it's hard to do a non-lethal Fire Blast, even though the Prowess trigger would have denied me a spell. At the end of the day, I mean, I wasn't gunning for Everett specifically with a Blue Elemental Blast. Like, this wasn't a spite thing. It wasn't like, oh, I'm mad that I lost the when I buy to you. I thought there was going to be a lot of burn at this tournament, and I think there was. There was Everett, Jason, another mono-red player, I think, mono-red Obosh that won, 2 blue-red Delver players, red-black Luris. Like, there were a lot of red decks, which I felt confident about. There's Phoenix, although I probably wouldn't bring it in. I maybe should have brought in Blue Blasts against Asmo Food if they had Boil. If we went to Game 3, maybe I would have brought him in. So I felt pretty good about the inclusion in the sideboard. It wasn't, like, super targeted, and it did win me the match. It's just unfortunate there was such a minor misplay that cost Everett top 8, unfortunately. At the end of the day, we take those. Magic's a hard game, and there's misplays all over the place, but that's how I squeaked in. It was very, very narrow margins. I think winning game 1 was pretty lucky. Losing game 2 was expected, and then winning game 3. It was a combination of dedicating 4 sideboard slots to the matchup, finding the right card at the right moment, and a really, really small marginal misplay. So that's how I squeaked into the top 8. I think I was 3rd seed going into it. And I played against Ash on blue-white control. Ash, I don't know Ash very well. I've always enjoyed talking to them, though. They're very nice, and I think very good at Magic. They play a lot of Canadian Highlander. I think they might actually have a YouTube channel. I may reach out to Ash and see if there is a YouTube channel. If there is, I'll probably drop the link below. So I haven't played against Ash before. I knew that they were on blue-white, but I didn't know the exact list. I think it was our intent to have open deck lists for the top 8. Those of you that played in the tournament, we did paper registration in addition to submitting the Moxfield lists through the Google form that I made. And we did that to make open deck lists easier for the top 8. I think that there wasn't necessarily the right communication between myself and Everett and Mavericks, and top 8 ended up not being open deck lists, which was a little surprising to everyone. I don't think it really matters. It just kind of means that we filled out paper for fun. So sorry to everyone who filled out paper for fun. So I didn't really know what his list was like. And this kind of goes back to my conversation about control when I was talking about playing Doug. Looking at the list now, I feel like I could have won this one. I did not win it, by the way. There's just not that many cards main board that I care about, right? It's 4 counterspells, 2 loose focus, and a mission briefing. Those are the only and a hull breacher, I guess. Those are the only cards that really have text against me, and the clock isn't that fast. I know the conventional wisdom when you're playing a combo deck is to go off at the last second before you die. I don't know how much that applies to control though, because like when your opponent is threatening to flashback memory deluges. It's not like you can give them all the time in the world, right? They're going to find every copy of Counterspell in their deck if you give them the time. So, I guess what I'm saying is I don't know how to play High Tide against control. I don't know when I'm supposed to go for it. Like, if I have it on turn 3 or turn 4 and they have Counterspell mana up, do I just go for it because it's not getting better? I don't know. I lost a grinder of a game 1. Game 2... So we didn't have open deck lists, which meant a couple things. I know that Ash brought in Blossoming Calms, and I brought in Echoing Truths for Void Mirrors and Damping Spheres. Now, notably, there are no Void Mirrors and Damping Spheres in this list, so my Echoing Truths were not very good. Conversely, Ash's Blossoming Calms were not very good because I have Fascination to win. So we hung out for a while, played some Magic, and eventually, I think Ash cast a spell, and then I think I went for a turnabout. They countered turnabout, then went to my turn with 1 mana up. I think they had a Prairie Stream up. I cast a High Tide, and I don't remember if it was in response to High Tide or in response to the second spell. Ash cast a Blossoming Calm, and I said, ooh, that makes things harder for me. But then I just stormed off, and I did the Fascination thing, milled us both out, and then I won the game. So I took 1 game. Game 3, Ash was on the play. Ash went for an early Cycle Timeless Dragon into Eternalized Timeless Dragon on turn 4. I decided that amount of pressure was unacceptable, and I Echoing Truth the token. Boink, pick it up, it's gone. Then we hung out for a while, and we got to a point where, Ash was super established. There was like a search for Ascanta getting ready to go or going. A lot of cards had been drawn. Memory Deluges were revealed. And I got to a point where I felt like I could attempt a Mind's Desire, and I was able to get under a High Tide, and I was able to put a Mind's Desire for 6 on the stack. And then Ash was able to lose focus 4 copies of Mind's Desire. I was able to pay for 1, but 3 got countered. So I had a Mind's Desire for 3, and that was it. And I whiffed pretty hard on it, which makes sense, and that was the end of my tournament. Looking at the list now, again, it feels winnable. I feel like I could win this. I'm not upset that I didn't win. Again, Ash is super nice. I really like him. and I was really happy to see 2 control decks in the top 8, I'll be honest. But I think with the configurations of our decks, I feel like this was winnable, which it's good in some ways. It means that, obviously there's more to learn with High Tide, and the fact that I feel like I had the tools to win this matchup is really cool. Obviously, I'm happy about top 8ing. That's awesome for me. It feels good to, top 8 something. Especially because, a lot of my performances at Monster with High Tide and other decks have been pretty lackluster. So it feels good to come in second in the win-a-buy, and it feels good to top 8 at the win-a-Taiga. Not upset about my losses at all. Very fine. But I think if I'm going to continue playing High Tide, I got to grind this matchup. I got to figure out how to beat 6 counterspells, right? If I can't beat 6 counterspells on High Tide, then, I got to do something different, I think. Like I said, I don't bring in the Spell Pierces. Anybody who has High Tide experience or is just smart, can you tell me, that's crazy wrong, right? Like, Spell Pierces are supposed to come in against Control to hit, like, early Jaces, Memory Deluges, and to fight over my High Tide, I think. So, I will say, I do bring in the Dig Through Time. I brought in Dig Through Time, Echoing Truth, and Fascination against Ash. I brought in Dig Through Time, so sometimes I'll switch Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time 1-1 if I think the instant speed is important, which it is against Control. But I like to have both of them if I think it's going to be a real grinder of a game, which I thought it would. I brought in 2 Echoing Truths for sideboard hate, which wasn't there. I brought in Fascination because Blossoming Calm, and I thought there might be like Stone Brains or something. So yeah, I don't know. Overall, I'm super happy with the tournament. I felt really good about it. My matchups were pretty favorable, I would say, across the board. I think that... obviously, I thought Doug was a bad matchup. It might be the worst matchup in the room, truthfully. The bye was clearly a good matchup. Very thankful for that. I don't know if I would have top 8'd without the bye. Andrew and Will were both favorable matchups, I would say. And then with 4 Blue Elemental Blasts, I think Everett in round 5 was even to favorable. Maybe not my best matchup. Like, I kind of would have preferred to play against Obosh Red, truthfully. But I felt fine about it. So that's my tournament. Like I said, if anyone's got any thoughts on High Tide versus Control, like, am I crazy? I feel like I could have won this match. Do you guys agree? Again, I'm super not upset about it. I just think I need to learn the matchup a little bit more. But I'm curious if you guys disagree. Like, who's favored in this matchup? That's my tournament. Thank you for watching. This should be coming out after the interview with Austin, and it should be coming out before the overall tournament analysis, because I want to do a little bit of analysis of the sideboard cards that were in play, and I haven't had a chance to do that today. So that's all I got. Thanks for tuning in.